Hi students, welcome to the sensual and perceptual theories. Perception theory is the term that describes the application of neurological research and accepted principles of psychological research to the study of visual communication. The lesson attempts to address how the mind or brain receives information, processes it, derives meaning from it and uses it to the study of visual communication. Thus, the lesson helps us assess the efficacy of existing theories of communication derived from social science research. To introduce students to the perceptual approach to communication theory and help them know how perceptual approach acknowledges the importance of emotions in processing all sorts of communication. To inform students about how visual communication parallels as perceptual process that is dependent on primary emotion based on systems of response. It explains that the primacy of perception theory is that person's response to visual images cannot be either conscious or logical. To enlighten the students that it is emotion that reasons the response of the youth and they are therefore highly responsible to emotional appeals through visuals in the way they think and act. Ultimately, the key to understanding the visual communication lies in the neurological working of the human brain. The early research in this direction dates back a century and a half to the discovery of connection between language and certain areas of the left cerebral hemisphere. The early works of William James and Gestalt psychologists Max Wertheimer, Wolfgang Kohler and Kurt Koffka and the ecological optics of J. Gibson have led the latest research to its next heights. The major impetus to a neurological approach to communication, however, comes from the 1960s split brain research of the late Rogers Perry at the California Institute of Technology and the visual processing research of David Hubel and Torsten Wiesel of Harvard Medical School, for which the trio was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine in 1981. The work of these men and of the subsequent generation of researchers who have continued their work of the organization of the human brain into the present, such as researchers like Michael Gazzaniga, Joseph Ledoux, Antonio Damasio, Samir Jacki and Steven Pinker among many others, is the basis of our expanding knowledge of the brain, and it is this knowledge that will derive visual communication study in the 21st century. The early researchers have offered us a very primitive understanding of visual communication. For instance, Kepler suggests that eye is essentially a camera passively recording an objective external reality. Similarly, misleading was the view of Descartes' reason, which according to him is this final arbiter of perception. On the contrary, this brain research suggests that though the sight might begin with the light hitting the retina, vision occurs deep within the brain. Further, the perception, the process by which one derives the meaning from what one sees, is an elaborate symphony played by the unconscious emotional system. Over the years, the scientists developed the neural maps of brain using which we get increasing insights into the numerous controversial questions of perception theory that are being resolved in intriguing manner. What are the interesting questions of perception theory? A. Nature versus nurture. B. Relationship between language and thought. C. Relationship between perception and emotion. And D. Relationship between vision and memory. In fact, the debate between nature and nurture has raged from the mid-19th century when Darwin first published his Origin of Species. Neurological researchers today still argue forcefully that the key characteristics of mind are inherited. The neural mechanics of the brain are far from reductive or deterministic. Joseph Ledoux in 2002 estimated mind and behavior to be approximately 40% of nature and 60% of nurture, but reminds us that synapses are key to the operation of both and that these synapses are wired up in the brain by one system that takes care of both situations. Visual experience is by far the most dominant learning mode. It is central to building up synaptic connections in the brain. No other sensory system has been studied so completely as the visual, and no other has shown such promise in revealing the secrets of mind and therefore of behavior. Because much of our visual experience today comes vicariously through media, an understanding of how perception works is fundamental to the ongoing communication research, particularly in terms of media effects. As media violence becomes the central focus of much social concern today, for example, it is important to note that much of the finger pointing for assigning blame is beside the point. Whatever experience a child has will build the pattern of his or her future response. Family interaction, formal education and media are all part of the stream of influence that builds and reinforces certain brain synapses. If one influence is stronger, this will sway perception in a particular direction. If one is weaker, it will eventually go to the root of all unreinforced and therefore ineffectual synapses and be reabsorbed into the system. Because evolution is a slow process, our brains have not yet adapted to visual experience gained via media in any special way. Although biological evolution proceeds at a snail's pace, technological revolution has sped us at awesome speed. For the brain's perceptual system, visual experience in the form of fine arts, mass media, virtual reality or even video games is merely a new stimulus entering the same pre-wired circuits we have inherited as part of our brain potential and is processed in the same way. In other words, visual media is just as real to the emotional brain as any other visual experience, and it contributes just as much to the brain's synaptic wiring. Our strong sense of mind integration, Damasio explained, is created from the concerted action of large-scale systems by synchronizing sets of neural activity in separate brain regions, in effect a trick of timing. This modular functioning also lends insight into the relationship between language and thought and ultimately to the efficacy of system semiotic criticism in visual communication theory. Linguistic theoretician Ray Jackendorf observed, language and thought, while related, are distinct forms of mental information. The answer to how thought can be different from language when we seem to think in words is that the language we hear in our heads while thinking is a conscious manifestation of the thought, not the thought itself, which is not present to consciousness. Researcher Steven Pinker, author of The Language Instinct, explained that the human brain utilizes at least 4 different formats in representing the thought. A. The visual image as a 2-dimensional picture like mosaic. B. A phonological representation that runs like a tape loop. C. Grammatical representations of nouns and verbs, phrases and clauses, stems and roots, phonemes and syllables arranged in hierarchical trees. And D. Mentalese, the language of thought in which our conceptual knowledge is couched. This 4th format, mentalese, Pinker explained, is the mind of lingua franca, a medium in which gist is captured and concepts are stored. It is this format that is comparable to Damasio's concept of image as a biological cluster of neurons firing in synchronicity. Mental imagery, Pinker stated, is the engine that drives our thinking about objects in space. Images drive the emotion as well as intellect. Again and again, for example, great creative minds explain their creative thought generation in terms of visual imagery and their reliance on mental images as springboards for extending their understanding well beyond the parameters of verbal language. As Einstein observed of his own mental images to explain his theories, images lead to generative synthesis. My particular ability does not lie in the mathematical calculation, but rather in visualizing effects, possibilities and consequences. Among other scientists, Pinker described as thinking in images are Faraday and Maxwell, Kekulé, Watson and Crick. Cognitive psychologist Howard Gardner suggests that the creative mind works in images precisely because mental images allow us to understand one idea through another. The format for all consciousness and all meaning imagery thus appears to be a function quite separate from the processing of spoken language or grammar per se, more akin to the process of visual perception than to language processing. The imagery of consciousness consists in patterns of meaning in which neurons combine into gestalts with meaning greater than and different from the sum of the individual parts. Semiotics and rhetorical criticism come closest to understanding visual communication when they look at relationships and tropes. But even at this level, they are still a tier of understanding away from the lingua franca of the brain and a whole system away from the visual communication. When what we read, what we hear and what we see reach the level of ideas, they all appear in a different format, the format of the neural imagery. This neurological shift is what results in meaning, and it is this patterning of neurons that allows us to understand something about the impact of what we see in addition to modularity and synchronicity. Another important aspect in understanding how perception works and its implications in terms of visual communication is the brain's basic hemispheric structure. The brain consists of two hemispheres, left and right, each a mirror image of the other with minor variations for specialization in each. Each hemisphere directs the movements of the opposite side of the body, and coordination between the two hemispheres is made possible by the bridge of the corpus callosum, which connects them. Although the earliest biological research into brain consisted mainly of the postmortem examination of the brain injured patients, the work of Roger Sperry in the 1960s on split brain patients with severe epilepsy showed that when the corpus callosum, the only informational conduit between the two hemispheres of the brain, is severed, the left and right hemispheres can no longer communicate thoughts of sophisticated emotions. Although each brain hemisphere is a mirror image of the other, each has its own strengths and weaknesses, ways of processing information and special skills. Although subsequent research in the field has shown this as a segmentation to be more complex than originally thought, we may still speak in general terms of left and right brain, although these two hemispheres maintain such a continuous and harmonious conversation, so fully complementary and integrative that it appears to be a single stream of consciousness. In general, the left hemisphere can be said to be analytical, logical, abstract and time sensitive, while the right hemisphere is more holistic and emotional, as well as more fearful, sad and pessimistic. Recognizing faces, finding your way around in space, discerning space shapes in camouflage and seeing patterns at a glance are right brain activities. Breaking down complex to patterns into component parts, focusing on detail, and intense analysis are left brain activities. In normal people, both sides of the brain continuously converge across the 8 billion nerve fibers of the corpus callosum, but specialized tasks are directed to one side of the other. In 95% of right-handed people, who themselves compose an estimated 90% of the world population, language facility is almost totally confined to the left hemisphere, which also houses the ability to recognize and imagine shapes according to the arrangement of the parts. The right hemisphere, in contrast, is excellent at estimating measurement of whole shapes, can easily judge length and width, and process information simultaneously and holistically. Most sensory input crosses from the incoming side to the opposite side of the brain. Visual input from the right half of each eye, for example, goes to the left side of the brain for processing, and visual input from the left goes to the right. In the science and the art of visual communication, these observations have enormous significance. Because images appeal to the right side of the brain, they are read in a different way from the words, which appeal to the left of the processing. In advertising, for example, Carter and Frith asserted that much advertising is designed to exploit the gap between the impressionable right brain and the critical left. Those adverts that use visual images rather than words to convey messages are particularly likely to impinge on the right hemisphere without necessarily being registered by the left. Jackie observed that artists are in some sense neurologists studying the brain with techniques that are unique to them, but studying unknowingly the brain and its organization nevertheless. And certainly the same can be said of advertising moguls who have long intuitively understood the hemisphere phenomenon. The Footy, Cohn and Belding advertising agency, for example, developed an advertising planning model of purchase decision making well over 20 years ago that recognized the feeling and thinking as distinctly separate parts within the same continuum and used this as the basis of developing effective creative strategies in ad campaigns. Our conscious mind and our emotional system usually work together smoothly, just as the commentary right and left hemispheres of the brain work together through a continuous dialogue across the corpus callosum. When they do not, however, the consequences can be catastrophic. In the process of developing a mature mind, several things can go wrong. Injury may prevent adequate emotional or cognitive abilities, deprivation or lack of use may prevent normal maturation during the evolutionary window of development, and that opens and closes according to a built-in genetic determinism. Pattern of negative attitudes and behavior may prematurely close off broader choices or reinforce destructive habits of mind or action. In his book Descartes' Error, for example, Damasio told the story of his patient Eliot, whose surgery to remove a fast-growing frontal lobe tumor severed the neural pathways from the amygdala, where emotions are generated, to the frontal cortex, where emotions are registered. Prefrontal cortex, a region of the frontal cortex behind the forehead, has also been identified as the site where the decision making takes place. The surgery left Eliot without the capacity to feel emotion and therefore without the ability to reach decisions and make accurate judgments. Controlled, dispassionate, eminently rational, but without his emotional system to help. Eliot lost the ability to prioritize, to choose one path of action over another, and to accurately evaluate others' motivations and character. Without a perspective on what was important and how much detail was sufficient, he was crippled in his decision making, even though his base of knowledge and his intelligence remained intact. Ultimately, because of the surgical damage to the right frontal cortices, Eliot lost his family, his social acumen, his work, his wealth, and his former life. Damasio's patient reveals not only the interdependence of reason and emotion, but also the evolutionary wisdom in unconscious emotional processing to prepare the way for logic and reason. Neurological research has also revealed the existence of genetic windows for the development of reason and emotion. From birth to age 3, for example, the brain is especially vulnerable. At this time, repeated abuse, neglect or terror from whatever source causes a flood of stress-related chemical responses that reset the brain's fight or flight hormones and make the child more or less reactive to stress throughout life. At this point, abusive parenting or even repeated stressful media exposure can change the way the brain responds in ordinary situations by hyper-reacting to negative influences or by becoming totally unresponsive to them, because the emotional system responds as automatically to a horror film as it does to the unreal thing. Unconscious emotional memories are stored in the amygdala, and stressful events and traumatic memories may be burned into the system. Although cortical thinking can override the immediate influence of this visual experience, the emotional system continues working to get the body ready for fight or flight. The heartbeat quickens, breathing accelerates, pupils dilate, temperature drops, and blood is redirected to the muscles. Most importantly, as we physically experience the fight or flight response, an emotional memory is laid down to guide future action. The greater the impact of the emotional experience, the more deeply the emotional memory is etched. This memory, because it belongs to a survival-based system geared to learning from traumatic experience, may never be eradicated. When thematic activities and the patterns of ideas and actions are repeated over and over again, they too become deeply embedded within the unconscious memory system and are established as templates. In this way, emotional response to media becomes a permanent part of our response repertoire. Perhaps the most dramatic example of this has come from the long-term cultural indicators project initiated in 1973 at the University of Pennsylvania. Cultivation analysis theory, which crystallized from the project, has concentrated on the storytelling function of media and focused on the developing patterns of attitude that neurological researchers have found to be the basis of unconscious emotional learning. Correlating these with television viewing habits, they conclude that repetitive pattern of television's mass-produced messages and images forms the mainstream of the common symbolic environment that cultivates the most widely shared conception of reality. We live in terms of the stories we tell, stories about what things exist, stories about how things work, and stories about what to do, and television tells them all through the news, drama, and advertising to almost everybody most of the time. Because our mammalian brain interprets media images as reality and responds emotionally according to the circumstances presented to it, understanding perceptual processing has significant implications for the media effects. Pinker explained, when we watch TV, we start a shimmering piece of glass, but our surface perception module tells the rest of the brain that we are seeing the real people and places. Even in a lifelong couch potato, the visual system never learns that television is a pane of growing phosphor dots, and the person never loses the illusion that there is a world behind the pane. Although the intent of visual media directors and producers is often taken into account in the discussion of media effects in terms of perception, the intention of the producer of the image is irrelevant. Neurological effects occur whether they are intended or not. When Gardner and his associates argue that television exposure has both first and second order effects in which both facts and patterns of assumptions are learned, they are fully in tune with the perceptual research. Gardner's mean world index, for example, heavy views of television vastly overestimated the amount of actual violence in the real world, and were more likely to see the world as a fearful and to mistrust people in it. Because neurologically continually stimulating groups of brain cells makes them more sensitive and easier to activate, repeated neural firings with the same thematic or emotional content increase in the likelihood of attitudinal and behavioral repetition. Like traumatic exposure, this realization has profound implications in terms of habitual media use and recurrent patterns of attitude and behavior within media, especially in interactive media such as video games. Neurologically, without our consciously realizing it, emotional learning occurs that preframes attitudes, thinking, and behavior. Emotional templates serve as basis for perceptual anticipation of the future, and although reason and emotion both play crucial and inseparable roles in perception at various times, emotion can and does function at the expense of reason. Whether we are continuously bombarded with the same mean world pattern or media, or we select out and deliberately repeat specific movies or video games because they resonate with the felt needs and realities, it is important to realize that the emotional learning that goes with media experience is both unconscious and peculiarly indelible. Damasio explained that images, that is mental patterns created through the senses, allows us to choose among repertoires of previously available patterns of action and optimize the delivery of the chosen action. Because the neurological maps that we use to navigate reality are drawn from the repetition of patterns of action provided by both direct experience and visual media, the parameters of our behavioral choices are determined by both using the same underlying neural mechanisms. In the words of Sperry in his 1981 Nobel lecture that initiated the neurological research that is the foundation for our new understandings in visual communication, where there used to be a chasm and irreconcilable conflict between the scientific and the traditional humanistic views of man and the world, we now perceive a continuum. Visual media, with its frequently recurring patterns of action and thematic development, are peculiarly well suited to the emotional learning, as is the individual impact of specific paintings, drawings, and sculptures in the fine arts. Nazi propaganda in Germany in the era preceding World War II began not with control of the spoken word, but with a state of art, architecture, and film initiative that captured people emotionally and intentionally bypassed reason. Today, remnants of the same visual techniques can be seen in entertainment form, interactive video games to virtual reality. Because visual messages are mostly processed by unconscious regions of the brain that do not understand that art and mass media are not reality, their visual power can have enormous impact, unintended or not, on our emotional development. Through emotional templates, our attitudes, ideas and actions are pushed in particular directions, positive or negative. The neurological research that is currently mapping the mind thus can be seen to provide an invaluable framework for new research in visual studies that bridges the interdisciplinary chasm between the traditional hard and soft sciences, and for understanding the social implications of what it means to see and to watch in a visually dominated culture.